What's going on, everybody? Steel Jedi here. Today, we have the 6th edition of this year's mock draft. I'd like to welcome a special guest, Steel Sentinel. Welcome to the channel. This video will be a collaboration mock draft. Full 7 rounds, both mocks. Ironically enough, him and I share the same first pick. In round 2, pick 49, the Pittsburgh Steelers select T. Higgins, wide receiver out of Clemson. As you can see, here are his combine measurements. Pretty impressive for one of the best receivers in the country. Okay, so when you look at these measurements, there's a couple of things that stand out. One, he's essentially 6'4" with pads on. He has an 81-inch wingspan, and at his pro day, he ran a 4.43. Pretty impressive for a guy his size. As you can see here are his career stats and stats from 2019 and 2020. I'm going to give you guys a second to look at those, while also realizing he's a 2018 national champion. So, the reason why we picked him. Okay. There's a lot of other receivers whose stock is rising. Guys like Chase Claypool, who is 6'4", 238 pounds, and ran a 4.42 40. Jalen Reagor, who is very similar to a Deebo Samuel this year. There's a lot of receivers whose stock is rising, and Higgins' stock is falling. For whatever reason, some teams look at him as an OTP, a one-trick pony, which I do not see whatsoever. I mean, you talk about a guy who's a height-weight speed specimen, who's very similar to a Martavis Bryant or an AJ Green. And if you actually asked him after his pro day, I watched his pro day interview, and they said that he actually grew up watching AJ Green. That's who he models his game after. And if we get half of what AJ Green was in his career, unfortunately he played for the Bengals, but if we got half of what he did in his career, we'd have a damn good number 3 receiver. One of his best attributes and specialties is the 50-50 ball. He's 6'4", so he is able to jump up and grab those contested 50-50 catches. He has very sticky hands. He's a great route runner. And to me, personally, he's the immediate starter at the Z position. The Z position, just so you guys know, there's a definition there. The Z position is the second outside receiver. Generally, it's going to be your guy that's the tallest, more physical receiver. Your X is your number 1 outside receiver who's, more of a route runner, like a Deontay Johnson-esque type player. And then you have your Y receiver, which is your slot receiver, which is where Juju will come back to this year, which is where he played his best over the course of his career. In today's game, you got to be 4 receivers deep. Not taking anything away from Washington, but with T. Higgins, he just offers you more in terms of his height and physicality. Washington coming off the bench as your 4th receiver and a guy who takes a lot of the pressure off of the rest of the guys by running those deep routes is going to be a pretty hard receiving core to stop. Another big thing, and you guys need to realize this when you go through your draft process, the Steelers brass showed up big time at this year's pro day for Clemson. Now, a lot of people said it was for Tanner Muse, which, spoiler alert, he's our 7th round pick as well, but they're not going to just take him out to dinner, considering the fact he's not even going to go before the 5th or 6th round. They are low-key looking at T. Higgins this year, and I have a feeling, if he does fall, which there's a very high chance that he could, we will be sprinting the card to the podium, if there's even a draft this year with the coronavirus. So, I also wanted to show Steel Sentinel's explanation, considering the fact we both had the same player. he described him perfectly. He's a field stretcher, 6'4", running a 4.4. He's got the measurements we need to have a star receiver to play outside. He was a solid combat catcher in college, which is something we really didn't have. You have James Washington, but he's not as good of a combat catcher as what T. Higgins is. Michael Thomas, A.J. Green, Martavis Bryant, if he could have stayed healthy and off the weed, kind of guy. But now, you bring him into the system, now we have that guy again. He makes your 1 through 4 extremely well-rounded. Each receiver has their own unique skill set. You got your possession guy in Juju, who's going to get you those tough yards. You got your route runner in Deontay. And now you got T. Higgins, who's going to give you that height and speed aspect of the game, with Washington, who could take the top off the coverage. So that concludes our second round pick. So with my third round compensatory pick, I got a bit of a surprise. A guy who I know a lot of people don't think is going to fall, but in my opinion, he will. Pick 102, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Ezra Cleveland, offensive tackle out of Boise State. You see his combine measurements here. I mean, he's an impressive player. And, you look at his stats. Snaps played, 973. Allowed pressures, 13 over the course of his career. He had an 81 run blocking grade, an 87 pass blocking grade, an overall grade of an 86. You bring him in, as I'm going to show you here, in the fact that you could bring him in for competition. Bring him in for competition with Chooks and Banner. I do not think we're going to keep Filer, unfortunately. I think we're going to tender Hilton and let Filer walk, because he's going to have a huge market in free agency. So, I feel like he can come in and compete with Chooks, who I think will eventually take over the left tackle position. But I think he can come in and compete with those two guys to be able to be the starting right tackle on this team. And we need to protect Ben at all costs. Top to bottom. I mean, tackle to center. On both sides, we got to protect him. And he would also really, really help in the run game because he's athletic. He's a guy who, if you wanted to, you could pull with your guards. So he's a freak athlete, who would be an immediate starter at the right tackle position. That concludes my third round compensatory pick. Steel Sentinel had a similar idea with our compensatory pick 102 in the third round. He selected Ben Bredesen, guard out of Michigan. You can see his combine measurements here. You guys can pause the video at any time if you would like to watch these or to read these combine measurements. They're also online, but we did our own Excel sheet, me and Logic did. So with all the other drills, he didn't participate, but he did get measured. Okay, the reason why he thinks we're going to be able to bring a guy like him in is he doesn't believe, that we're going to keep Foster, and he doesn't believe that Filer is going to be moved from right tackle. He believes that Filer is going to stay and Hilton's going to go. So it's just a little bit of a different situation, but similar effect. He would be a guy who can come in, immediately fill in for Foster. He has the measurements and the size to be able to replace him. And he's a starting caliber left guard, in his opinion, from year one. A David DeCastro type player. A solid piece to be able to continue to build the foundation of our house. I've talked about that 100 times before. Both Ezra and Ben could be the start of the new foundation of this house. So that concludes his third round compensatory pick. So with my fourth round pick 124 overall, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Harrison Bryant, tight end out of FAU. Again, combine measurements here. If you guys want to pause the video and look at him, you can. Him running a 4.73 may not be the nicest time for a tight end, but he's a very, very solid player. And I'm going to get into it in a second here. Here's his career stats, his stats from last year as well. He's a very, very solid tight end. And, if I'm going to go into why we would pick him, there's a couple of reasons. One, a lot of people are looking at him as the next George Kittle, like this year's George Kittle. If you go on to NFL.com, Lance Zierlein actually compares him to George Kittle. I think he's very underappreciated in this year's draft class because of the 40 that he ran and the school that he went to. But at the same time, he won the Mackey Award this year, which is given to the nation's top tight end. He's a guy who is very, very solid in the receiving game. He may need to gain some weight because he's only about 245, 243. He may need to gain some weight, but if we're going to keep Vance because of Ben coming back, there's no way we're going to be able to keep Vanette. And I do not like Gentry at the number 2 position right away. So you need to look at a very deep tight end class and a guy who would be an immediate number 2 tight end on our team with number 1 tight end potential. He was used a lot as a very athletic slot receiver-esque type of tight end at FAU. So he's a very, very highly productive player for them. There's one other thing he may need to work on, and that's his blocking, but a lot of tight ends do coming out of college in today's game. And again, even his swagger is Stone Cold Kittle-like. Imagine a guy like a George Kittle on this offense stretching the middle of the field. Yeah, Kittle ran a 4.5, I believe, at the Combine, so faster than Harrison Bryant, but they're very similar type players. So that concludes my first 4th round pick. With Steel Sentinel's first 4th round pick, which is pick 124, he selected Jordan Elliott, defensive tackle out of Missouri. Again, Combine measurements. You guys can pause the video and look at him if you would like. You could also get him online. And if anybody wants the Excel sheet, I will post it to my Twitter. Okay, it was something that Logic and I did in combination with each other, but he did a lot of the work, so give him a lot of the credit. But here's exactly why he picked Jordan Elliott. Describes him as a freak athlete and not someone you see every day at the defensive tackle position. An Ed Oliver of sorts. With Hargrave gone, he believes, that you have to keep adding a solid piece to that zero tech position for the Pittsburgh Steelers defensive line, even though, me personally, I have more faith in Bugs and Alualu than most people do. And from everything that I'm hearing out in Pittsburgh, they won't draft a guy, but I would not be upset with this pick. He's a matchup nightmare, 0 tech to 3 tech, and, knock on wood, Tuitt hasn't been able to stay healthy. So we need to really bolster that defensive line, in his opinion. And I like the pick. I went more, against the grain with my draft. So that concludes his 4th round pick. With my second 4th round pick 135 overall, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting Kevin Dotson, left guard, he plays right guard, but left guard out of Louisiana Lafayette. The Raging Cajun, 6'4", 321 pounds, and how he wasn't invited to the Combine is beyond me. He's the highest graded interior offensive lineman in the nation, according to Pro Football Focus. He was a first-team All-American. And when you look at why we would bring him in, I also said, hey, no Combine invite? Really? To me, personally, and to a lot of people who watch his tape, he's the best run-blocking guard in the draft. Period. He's an underrated pass blocker. And again, just look at his tape against Appalachian State. That blew me away when I first watched it. Foster will likely be cut and retired. Okay, so he would be coming in and starting day 1 at left guard. Now people won't be as concerned with our running game this year. It's going to be 10 times stronger bringing in a guy like this. To me, he's the steal of the draft. This concludes my 4th round selections for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So a Sentinel's last 4th round selection, which is pick 135 again, he had us selecting Anthony McFarland, running back out of Maryland. You can see his combine measurements. You can see his statistics here. Pause the video if you would like to watch them. I will get into why he believes we need a guy like Anthony McFarland. To him, Anthony McFarland provides the speed aspect this team has been lacking for a long time. A legit speed option since Fast Willie. He's the type of player that Kareth White was with Pittsburgh, but, he was probably a more valuable piece because he actually is a better between the tackles runner. So he believes as though that we need another speed aspect on this team, and I wouldn't mind the pick. I actually have a buddy who lives in Baltimore who has known Anthony McFarland for a while and said he's a freak athlete. He ran a 4.44 at the combine, and he believes that speed is a definite need for the Pittsburgh Steelers this year. But that concludes his 4th round selections. Now my 6th round selection, pick 198 overall, may be a shock to some people because a lot of people look at him as an undrafted free agent. But after his pro day, he will definitely get drafted this year. Pick 198 overall, the Pittsburgh Steelers select Bronson Rechsteiner, fullback out of Kennesaw State. Look at his pro day measurements. 5'10", 223, ran a 4.48, benched 35 times on the bench press, 225, okay? 35-inch vertical jump, 4.22 on the short shuttle, and 6.95 on the 3-cone. He is a freak athlete, okay? And why? Okay, look at these stats. Okay, 244 rushing attempts, 1,496 rushing yards, and 9 touchdowns. Average 6.1 yards a carry, 12 touchdowns, or 12 receptions, 189 yards, average 15.8 yards a catch. 2019 alone, 112 rushing attempts, 909 rushing yards, 7 touchdowns, averaged 8.1 yards a rush. 8 receptions, 101 yards, averaged 12.6 yards a catch. And that's not even bringing up his ability to be able to block as a fullback. Okay, like I said here, it may come as a shock to most, but Nix is getting older, and he's getting quite expensive. So we're essentially getting a younger version of him who's much more of an athletic freak. He's a great blocker, he's an explosive runner, and you could honestly keep both of them. Instead of drafting a running back, draft this fullback. And keep 2 fullbacks. Keep Connor, Snell, and Samuels. But then you would also keep Nix and Rechsteiner. A guy who you could really use both of those fullbacks to help in the running game. 2 blockers. It would be insane to see a formation like that. To me, and to a lot of people around the NFL circle, he reminds me of a Kyle Juszczyk. He's a Kyle Juszczyk Jr. Go watch his tape. If you do not believe me, go watch his tape. Here's a picture of him going through his pro day. He's shredded. Yeah, some people may say he's just another Sutton Smith. No. Sutton Smith was an outside linebacker. He played fullback his entire career. Look who's in the background. I'll leave it at that. That concludes my 6th round selection for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So with pick 198 in the 6th round, Steel Sentinel selects A.J. Green, cornerback out of Oklahoma State. You can see his combine measurements and his statistics here. I'm going to get into why he believes as though he is the guy for us in the 6th round. He thinks he's quality depth at the cornerback position, very similar to a Steven Nelson. To me, he's a little bit taller, and I think he's not there yet. I personally wouldn't compare him to a Steven Nelson, but he does have that kind of upside. he claims, and when you watch his tape, it's true. I mean, he picked off quarterbacks like Will Grier and Baker Mayfield, who are both quarterbacks in the NFL, and solid guys at that. And they may not be the best, but they're solid quarterbacks. And, he would be a guy who could work inside and out, nickel and perimeter corner. That's exactly why he picked Oklahoma State cornerback A.J. Green in the 6th round. On to the 7th. So with the 7th round selection, as I stated earlier, both of us picked the same player. And it's from the same school as the first selection that we both had. Pick 232nd overall. Pittsburgh Steelers select Tanner Muse, dime linebacker out of Clemson. Notice how I said that. Okay. Here's his combine measurements and his career statistics as a redshirt senior at Clemson. He was productive. And he had very, very good statistics, especially in his last season at Clemson, tallying 4 interceptions, 54 tackles, 5.5 for loss, 3 passes defended. Here's exactly why we believe he's the perfect fit in round 7. Okay, he could play both dime linebacker and backup strong safety for the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's a great tackler. He's a ball magnet. He'd be a special teams ace. He's got the experience with the age as a redshirt senior. And again, Steelers brass took him out to dinner. Keep that in mind, guys. That's very important in the draft process. Oh, and not to mention, he's a 2-time national champion with the Clemson Tigers, 2016 and 2018. Okay? And Sentinel goes more into it and says, it's the kind of players the Steelers have been looking at since Burnett and Barron. They tried to bring guys in at that dime linebacker position and just haven't succeeded. Why not bring a young guy in and mold him into that role? Again, he says, invited to dinner, they're very interested, and he's not going to play safety at the next level. He can as a backup strong safety, but he's mostly going to be a dime linebacker and a dollar linebacker in most formations. That concludes our collaboration for the 6th edition of Steel Jedi's Steelers Mock Draft. Like, comment, subscribe, and may the steel be with you.